The perfect prison. High Warden Vazix stood before the curved observation window of the Helios containment facility, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the pale blue light from the dwarf star below. His secondary appendages twitched with pride as he surveyed what many considered the greatest achievement in galactic incarceration technology. The facility wasn't just a prison. It was a statement, a testament to the advanced civilizations that had built it. "Status report," he commanded, his translator converting the harmonics of his native speech into standard galactic basic. Chief Engineer Melira's tentacles danced across the holographic interface. "All systems nominal, High Warden. The quantum barriers are at full strength. Gravitational dampeners are functioning at optimal levels, and the psychic suppression field remains stable." Vazix's primary eyes narrowed as he studied the incoming transport ship. It was remarkably unremarkable. A standard Federation prisoner transport, its hull bearing the marks of countless intersystem journeys. Hard to believe it carried what the Federation Council had classified as an Omega-level threat. "Tell me about the prisoner again," Vazix said, though he had memorized the file days ago. Sarah Chen, human, apprehended during what appeared to be a routine customs inspection at Outpost 47, Melira recited. When scanned, she exhibited unusual properties that triggered every security protocol in the station. The Federation Council classified her case immediately. Vazix's crystalline structure vibrated with amusement, and she surrendered without resistance. According to the report, she seemed almost pleased to be arrested, helped the security forces with their paperwork. The transport ship docked with a gentle thud that belied the tension in the control room. Vazix watched as the airlock cycled, his defensive systems automatically adjusting to accommodate the nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere humans required. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Sarah Chen walked into the reception area as if she were entering a luxury hotel rather than the most secure prison in known space. She was small by human standards, with short black hair and wearing the standard-issue prisoner jumpsuit as if it were formal attire. Her most striking feature was her smile, genuine, warm, and completely inappropriate for someone facing eternal containment. "This is lovely," she said, looking around the pristine white reception area. "The quantum harmonics in your containment fields have such a pleasant resonance. Much better than that awful buzzing at Outpost 47. Vazix's crystalline structure froze. Humans shouldn't be able to perceive quantum harmonics. They shouldn't even know they existed. He recovered quickly, his training taking over. "Sarah Chen, you have been remanded to the Helios Containment Facility under Article 7 of the Galactic Security Act. You will be..." "Oh, is that a Type 7 neural inhibitor?" Sarah interrupted, pointing at a nearly invisible device in the ceiling. "I've always wanted to see one up close. The theoretical papers on them are fascinating, but they never quite capture the elegant complexity of the actual device." Melira's tentacles twisted in confusion. "High Warden, our sensors are having difficulty maintaining a lock on the prisoner's vital signs. They keep shifting." "Standard human variability," Sarah offered helpfully. "Our biochemistry can be a bit dramatic. Speaking of which, would it be possible to get some coffee?" The replicators at Outpost 47 never quite got the taste right. Vazix felt his certainty beginning to crack. In his centuries as a warden, he had processed thousands of prisoners from hundreds of species. They arrived angry, terrified, desperate, or broken. None of them had ever critiqued his facility's quantum harmonics or requested beverages. "You will be escorted to your containment cell," he continued firmly. "It has been specially designed to handle my unique properties." Sarah's smile widened slightly. "That's very thoughtful. I look forward to experiencing it, though you might want to adjust the phantom particle emission rate in your quantum barriers. They're running about 0.03% above optimal efficiency, which could lead to some interesting resonance effects with the psychic suppression field." The control room fell silent. Vazix's secondary appendages went completely still, a sign of extreme stress in his species. He had personally calibrated those barriers. The calculations involved were beyond most supercomputers. This human couldn't possibly. "Security team," he said finally, "escort the prisoner to containment cell Alpha. Maximum protocols." As Sarah was led away, still smiling and commenting on the architectural features of the facility, Vozix turned to his chief engineer. "Run a complete diagnostic on the quantum barriers. Check the phantom particle emission rates." Hours later, when the results showed a 0.03% deviation, exactly as the human had claimed, Vozix realized that for the first time in his career, he wasn't certain who was containing whom. In her cell, Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, still smiling. The coffee they had eventually brought her was actually quite good. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The only question was whether the facility's systems would detect the changes beginning to ripple through their quantum fields before it was too late. She rather hoped they wouldn't. It would make the next few days so much more interesting. Breaking physics. Chief Engineer Melera's tentacles hadn't stopped twitching for the past 12 hours. The holographic displays surrounding her workstation were a chaos of shifting numbers and fluctuating graphs that defied every physical law she had spent her career mastering. "These readings can't be correct," she muttered, her translator struggling to keep up with her agitated clicks and whistles. The quantum barrier's coherence should have collapsed hours ago, but instead it's evolving. Across the control room, Security Director Raxilon's metallic scales rattled with irritation. The prisoner hasn't moved from her assigned position, hasn't slept, hasn't done anything except sit there and occasionally drink coffee. Yet our systems are acting like they're under assault from a Class 5 civilization. High Warden Vozix studied the main viewing screen, where Sarah Chen continued her serene meditation in the center of Containment Cell Alpha. The human's vital signs scrolled across adjacent monitors, each reading more impossible than the last. Her core temperature has risen by 20 degrees, one of the medical technicians reported, yet she shows no signs of distress. The cell's environment should be compensating, but instead, the technician's voice trailed off as new data flooded their screens. "Instead what?" Vozix demanded. "Instead, the cell appears to be adapting to her rather than the other way around. The quantum fields are realigning themselves. It's as if..." The technician's compound eyes widened. "It's as if the containment systems are learning from her." Vozix's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. "That's impossible. The systems are designed to suppress and contain, not to learn." "Tell that to the human," Raxilon growled. "Director, we're registering anomalies in sections of the facility that shouldn't even be connected to Cell Alpha. The auxiliary power grid is showing patterns that match human brainwave frequencies. The gravitational dampeners are pulsing in sync with her heartbeat." In her cell, Sarah Chen opened her eyes and stretched languorously. "The coffee really is excellent," she said, apparently to no one. "Much better than I expected. Though you might want to check on the quantum fluctuations in Block C. They're approaching critical resonance." The control room erupted into motion as alarms began blaring. Melera's tentacles flew across her controls. "She's right. Block C is showing signs of quantum instability. But that's impossible. It's completely isolated from the prisoner's cell." "Shut it down," Vozix ordered. "Initiate emergency containment protocols." "Already trying," Raxilon snarled. "The systems aren't responding to override commands. They're asking for authentication from the prisoner." Sarah's voice came through the comm system, though no one had activated it. "You really should have been more careful with your quantum encryption protocols. They're quite clever, but they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how space-time behaves around conscious observers, especially human ones." Vozix felt his crystalline structure threatening to resonate with stress. "What are you doing to my facility?" "Me? Nothing at all. I'm just sitting here enjoying my coffee. Your facility, on the other hand, is finally beginning to understand what it was actually built to do. Did none of you ever wonder why the Federation Council was so insistent on constructing this particular prison, with these particular specifications, at exactly this point in space. The main screen suddenly filled with data streams that none of the facility's staff had ever seen before. Star charts, gravitational maps, quantum probability calculations, all flowing past faster than even their enhanced minds could process. "By the void," Melera whispered. "The facility. It's not just a prison, is it?" Sarah stood up, still holding her coffee cup. The quantum barriers around her cell shimmered and shifted, not failing, but rather transforming into something else entirely. "No, it's not. It's a key. And you've all been very helpful in helping me turn it." "A key to what?" Vozix demanded, even as his sensors showed him the impossible changes spreading throughout his facility. "To the real prison," Sarah replied. "The one that's been here since before your species learned to walk upright. The one that holds something your ancestors helped lock away when they discovered what happens when you break the universe's most fundamental law." The facility's lights flickered as power redirected itself through circuits that hadn't existed minutes before. Melera's instruments showed quantum entanglement patterns expanding exponentially, connecting systems that should have been permanently isolated. "You see," Sarah continued, her voice now coming from every speaker in the facility, "humans have a rather unique relationship with physics. We don't just break it. We convince it to reconsider its position on what's possible. And your wonderful facility, with all its quantum barriers and psychic suppression fields, isn't designed to contain that ability." She took another sip of coffee. "It's designed to amplify it." Security Director Raxilon's scales had turned pale with fear. "The containment protocols, they're not failing. They're strengthening, but not in any configuration we designed. The whole facility is becoming something else." Vozix watched as new rooms and corridors began to phase into existence, geometric impossibilities that shouldn't have been able to exist in normal space. "What are you?" he asked the human who had turned his perfect prison inside out. Sarah Chen smiled that same serene smile she'd worn since arriving. "I'm a locksmith, or maybe a key. It depends on your perspective. But more importantly," she gestured at the transforming facility around them, "I'm about to show you what your ancestors were so afraid of that they built a prison the size of a solar system to contain it." The facility shuddered as ancient machinery, hidden beneath quantum fields and dimensional folds, began to wake up. Sarah's voice was almost gentle as she added, "Don't worry. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. Though you might want to hold on to something. Breaking a few 100,000 years of quantum encryption can be a bit bumpy." As reality itself began to bend around them, Vozix realized that his perfect prison hadn't failed. It had succeeded beyond anything its builders had imagined. He just wished he knew whether that was cause for celebration or terror. The hidden purpose. As the Helios containment facility continued its impossible transformation, High Warden Vozix watched emergency reports flood in from across the sector. Gravitational sensors on nearby worlds were registering disturbances that shouldn't have been possible. Space itself seemed to be folding around them, creating patterns that made his crystalline structure ache just from looking at the readings. "The Federation Council is demanding answers," Security Director Raxilon reported, his metallic scales now a pale silver of extreme stress. "They're picking up quantum disturbances as far as the Carina sector." "Tell them exactly what we know," Vozix replied. "Nothing." He turned to where Sarah Chen stood calmly in what used to be the facility's central control room, now transformed into something that hurt his eyes to look at directly. "Though perhaps our guest would like to explain." Sarah traced patterns in the air with her finger, leaving trails of quantum probability that sparkled like diamond dust. "Your ancestors were brilliant, you know. They discovered something remarkable about the nature of reality. Specifically, that consciousness itself is a fundamental force, as basic as gravity or electromagnetism. But they also discovered that this force could be concentrated." Melera's tentacles coiled tightly as new data streamed across her displays. "The ancient texts, there were warnings about those who dreamed too deeply. We always thought they were metaphors." "They weren't," Sarah confirmed. Your ancestors found entities that existed in the spaces between conventional reality. Beings of pure consciousness that had evolved beyond physical form, and they were terrified of what they found. The facility shuddered again as another section reconfigured itself. What had once been the prison's power core was now a spiraling structure that seemed to extend infinitely inward despite occupying finite space. These entities, Sarah continued, weren't hostile, exactly. They were simply incompatible with conventional spacetime. Their mere presence caused reality to unravel. So your ancestors built this facility, not just to contain them, but to create a space where both forms of existence could coexist safely. But something went wrong. Vozix guessed, pieces of ancient history finally clicking into place. Sarah nodded. The entities began to dream too deeply. As your texts put it, their consciousness started bleeding through the containment barriers. Your ancestors realized they needed a way to wake them up, to guide them back to a state that wouldn't threaten the fabric of reality. And that's where humans come in, Raxilon said, comprehension dawning in his compound eyes. Exactly. Humans exist in an unusual quantum state. We're simultaneously more and less stable than most sentient species. We can interact with these entities without being overwhelmed by them. We can enter their dreams and return unchanged. Sarah's smile turned slightly sad. That's why the Federation Council was so interested in me when their scans detected my particular talents. They needed someone who could reach across that divide. New alarms blared as the facility's transformation reached its final stages. The walls had become transparent, revealing swirling patterns of energy that seemed to exist in more dimensions than space should allow. They're waking up, Sarah said softly. Can you feel them? Vozix could. Something was pressing against the edges of his consciousness, vast, ancient minds stirring from eons of sleep. He saw similar reactions among his staff, Melera's tentacles moving in impossible patterns, Raxilon's scales shifting through colors that shouldn't exist. What happens now? Vozix asked, fighting to maintain his coherence as reality fluctuated around them. Now, Sarah said, rolling up her sleeves, I do what humans do best. I adapt. These entities need to be guided back to a stable state, taught how to interact with conventional spacetime without unraveling it. It's like teaching someone to walk again after a very long sleep. The facility's new configuration stabilized, its impossible geometry settling into patterns that seemed to bridge the gap between normal space and whatever realm the ancient entities inhabited. Sarah stood at its center, her form beginning to blur slightly at the edges. I should warn you, she added, this next part might be a bit dramatic. Humans tend to have that effect on physics when we really get going. You might want to alert nearby systems to expect some unusual phenomena. Nothing dangerous, she assured them quickly, just interesting. Vozix watched as Sarah Chen, the prisoner who had turned his perfect prison into something far more remarkable, began to glow with an inner light that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of space itself. How long will this take? Time works differently where I'm going, she said, her voice beginning to echo strangely. But don't worry. I've done this before. Well, technically I'm doing it now and will have done it then, quantum mechanics being what they are. She grinned. This is why humans make such good locksmith keys. We're quite comfortable with paradox. As Sarah's form began to fade into the swirling patterns of energy, merging with the threshold between realities, Vozix realized that his facility hadn't failed its purpose at all. It had finally, after thousands of years, fulfilled it. The last thing they heard before Sarah disappeared completely into the quantum maelstrom was her voice, tinged with amusement. Oh, and if anyone from the Federation Council asks, tell them I'll need more coffee when I get back. Breaking physics is thirsty work. Then she was gone, leaving the transformed facility humming with power as it bridged the gap between two forms of existence, while its staff tried to figure out how to explain to their superiors that their prison had just become a gateway to realms beyond conventional reality, and that a human was now walking between worlds, teaching ancient dream beings how to exist without unmaking the universe. Just another day in a galaxy it was still trying to understand exactly what it had gotten itself into when humans joined the galactic community. Convergence. The Federation Council chamber had never been so crowded. Representatives from over 300 species packed the vast amphitheater, their varied physiologies creating a living tapestry of forms and colors. They had come seeking answers about the quantum disturbances that had rippled across 12 sectors of space and about the human who had caused them. High Warden Vizek stood before them, his crystalline form catching the light from a dozen different suns streaming through the chamber's transparent dome. Behind him, holographic displays showed the transformed Helios facility, now a shimmering nexus of impossible geometries and quantum bridges. The human prisoner, Sarah Chen, has been in the interdimensional space for 72 standard hours, he reported. In that time, we've recorded over 10,000 distinct quantum events, but he paused, his structure vibrating with what might have been pride, not a single breach of containment. A ripple of mixed relief and concern moved through the assembled representatives. A Nexian delegate, their gas cloud form swirling with anxiety patterns, spoke first. And these ancient entities she claims to be rehabilitating. What assurance do we have that they won't simply destroy reality as we know it? Before Vazix could respond, new alarms sounded throughout the chamber. The holographic displays flickered, showing massive energy spikes throughout the facility. In the center of the main screen, a point of light began to grow. Quantum bridge forming. Melera's voice came through the comm system. It's different from the others. More stable, more controlled. The light expanded, taking on complex patterns that seemed to fold through dimensions beyond normal space. And then, as casually as stepping through a doorway, Sarah Chen walked out of it. She looked exactly as she had when she disappeared, down to the slight smile on her face, though now she was accompanied by what appeared to be a shifting pattern of light and shadow that moved with its own impossible grace. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned chamber. "But I thought it would be easier to show rather than tell." She gestured to the pattern floating beside her. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Aurora. They're one of the entities your ancestors encountered, though that's not their real name. Their actual name exists in 15 dimensions and tends to give most species headaches." A pattern shifted, forming into something almost comprehensible, a suggestion of wings, of eyes, of movement that existed somewhere between thought and reality. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, carrying emotions rather than words. Curiosity, greeting, gentle amusement. "Aurora has learned to manifest in our space without disrupting it," Sarah explained. "Think of it as learning to walk on the surface of a pond without breaking the surface tension. They're quite excited to meet you all properly. They've been watching our civilizations develop for millennia, but they never had a way to communicate safely before." The Nexian delegate's gas cloud form had frozen in shock. You taught them to exist in our reality." "More like I taught them to dip their toes in without causing ripples," Sarah corrected. "Humans have a particular talent for existing in multiple states simultaneously. Quantum superposition comes naturally to us. We make good translators between conventional space and whatever you want to call where they exist." The pattern that was Aurora shifted again, and suddenly every being in the chamber felt a warm sense of gratitude and understanding wash over them. Images flickered through their minds. Stars being born, civilizations rising and falling. The slow dance of galaxies, all seen from a perspective that made even the oldest races feel young. "They want to help," Sarah continued. "They've watched us struggling with problems they solved eons ago. Entropy, dark energy, the collapse of space-time itself. Now that they can communicate without accidentally unraveling reality, they're eager to share what they know. A crystalline elder, their form ancient enough to remember the original legends, vibrated with concern. And what do they want in return?" Sarah's smile widened slightly. "Company. Imagine existing for billions of years, able to see everything but never interact with it. They're not gods or monsters. They're just people who evolved differently than we did. Very, very differently. Aurora chimed again, and this time the sound carried images of possibilities. Clean energy that drew power from the quantum foam itself, ships that could cross galaxies in moments by stepping sideways through dimensions, diseases cured by adjusting the probabilistic nature of cellular decay. Of course, Sarah added, we'll need to take it slowly. Too much too fast could still cause problems. That's why the Helios facility is so important. It's not just a bridge, it's a classroom. A place where our forms of existence can meet safely and learn from each other. The Federation Council chamber erupted in discussion, hundreds of species trying to grasp the implications of what they were hearing. Vizix watched as Sarah and Aurora moved among them, answering questions, easing fears, building bridges between forms of life that had once seemed incompatible. You planned this from the beginning, he said when she passed near him. Getting arrested, being sent to the facility, it was all deliberate. Sarah shrugged. Humans are good at finding unconventional solutions. We had to get the facility to recognize its true purpose, and we had to do it in a way that wouldn't cause panic. Sometimes the best way through a wall is to convince it to turn into a door. Aurora chimed in agreement, their form briefly taking on a structure that mimicked Vizix's crystalline pattern before flowing back into abstract geometry. Besides, Sarah added with a wink, I really did enjoy the coffee. And now, she gestured at the chamber full of representatives grappling with a fundamental shift in their understanding of reality. Now we get to the really interesting part, figuring out what happens when you combine three different forms of evolution: biological, technological, and whatever you want to call what Aurora's people did. Vizix's structure vibrated with what might have been laughter. And humans will be at the center of it all, won't they? Breaking physics and rebuilding it to be more interesting. That's what we do best, Sarah agreed. We adapt, we explore, and we make friends with the impossible. Speaking of which, she turned to address the chamber at large, her voice carrying over the chaos of discussion. Who's ready to learn how to walk between worlds? The answer, it turned out, was everyone. The age of separation was ending, and a new era of possibility was beginning. All because a human had decided that the laws of physics were more like guidelines anyway. Paradigm shift. 5 years after Sarah Chen walked through quantum fire and returned with beings from beyond conventional space, the galaxy had changed in ways that even the oldest civilizations were still struggling to comprehend. The Helios facility, once the most secure prison in known space, had become the center of a new kind of civilization, one that existed simultaneously in multiple states of reality. High Warden Vizix, now Director of Interdimensional Relations, stood in what had once been his control room. The space had evolved into something that defied traditional geometry, yet somehow felt more natural than ever before. Through quantum-enhanced senses, he could see layers of reality overlapping like pages in an infinite book. Another successful transition, Sarah reported, emerging from a shimmering portal with a group of students, some physical, some existing as patterns of pure consciousness, and some somewhere in between. This batch is particularly promising. The Nexian collective actually managed to maintain quantum coherence for a full hour in the void space. The Nexian representatives, their gas cloud forms now threaded with strands of impossibility, pulsed with pride. They had been among the first to volunteer for the human-led training programs, eager to expand their understanding of existence itself. And the stability metrics? Vizix asked, though he already knew the answer. They hadn't had a single containment breach since Sarah had revealed the facility's true purpose. Perfect, she smiled. Aurora's people have become excellent teachers now that they understand how to modulate their presence. Turns out all they needed was someone to show them how to think smaller without thinking less. Aurora themselves manifested nearby, their form now a comfortable blend of comprehensible and impossible. They had become something of a celebrity among their kind, the first to master the art of existing partially in conventional space. Their success had encouraged others of their species to emerge from the deep dreams where they had hidden for eons. The Federation Council's latest report suggests we're approaching a technological singularity, Vozix noted, displaying a hologram filled with data from across known space. The integration of quantum conscious technology has accelerated development in ways we never imagined possible. Sarah watched as her latest students practiced moving between states of reality, each finding their own way to bridge the gap between the possible and the impossible. "That's not quite accurate," she said. "We're not approaching a singularity. We're approaching a synthesis. The quantum entities aren't giving us technology. They're teaching us to understand reality itself in new ways. And in return, we're teaching them how to dream smaller dreams without losing their essence." The facility hummed with energy as another group of students arrived from across the galaxy. Where once there had been prison cells, there were now classroom spaces that existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. The ancient quantum entities, once feared as destroyers of reality, now served as guest lecturers in the art of conscious evolution. "Did you know this would happen?" Vozix asked, not for the first time. "When you've allowed yourself to be arrested and sent here." Sarah's smile turned enigmatic. "Humans have a saying. The best way to predict the future is to create it. We knew the entities were there, knew they were trying to communicate. We knew your ancestors had built this facility as a bridge, even if they'd forgotten its purpose. All we needed was someone who could remind reality that its laws are more like suggestions." A soft chime echoed through the facility. Aurora, sharing a memory of the first time they had successfully manifested in normal space without causing quantum disruptions. The image carried with it a profound sense of joy and discovery that resonated with everyone present. "The really interesting part," Sarah continued, "is what comes next. We're not just teaching different forms of life to coexist. We're creating something entirely new. The civilization that exists across all possible states of reality, bridging the gap between matter and consciousness, between being and becoming." Vozix's crystalline form shimmered with understanding. "And humans, what is your role in this new civilization?" "We're the translators," Sarah said, watching as her students practiced moving between states of existence. "The bridges, the ones who can walk between worlds because we never quite believed in the impossibility of it all. Other species evolved to fit perfectly into their niches. We evolved to adapt to any niche we found, including ones that shouldn't exist." Around them, the facility continued its endless transformation, each change bringing it closer to its true purpose. Not a prison, but a crucible where different forms of existence could meet and learn from each other. The quantum entities brought their vast understanding of reality's deeper nature. The conventional species brought their diversity and creativity, and humans brought their unique ability to look at the laws of physics and say, "That's more of a guideline, really." "Director," one of the facility's staff called out, their form now a hybrid of conventional matter and quantum probability. "We're receiving requests from 17 new species asking to join the program, including—" They paused, their probability patterns shifting in surprise, "including 3 that we thought were myths." Sarah laughed. "Well, myth is just another word for something we haven't learned to understand yet. Shall we go welcome them to class?" As they moved through the facility's quantum-shifted corridors, Vozix reflected on how far they had come from the days when he had thought this was merely a prison. Now it was a university, an embassy, and a gateway to forms of existence that his ancestors had only dreamed of. And at the center of it all were the humans, not the strongest, not the smartest, but uniquely suited to bridging the gap between the possible and the impossible. "You know," Sarah said, pausing at the threshold of what had once been the facility's main gate and was now a nexus point between multiple states of reality. "The entities have a name for humans in their 15-dimensional language. The closest translation would be those who walk between dreams. They'd been waiting for us for a very long time." The gate shimmered with possibility as new arrivals began to appear, beings of light and shadow, of probability and purpose, all coming together to learn how to exist in ways their ancestors had never imagined possible. The age of separation was over. The age of synthesis had begun. And at the heart of it all was a human who had turned a prison into a bridge, simply by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible.